What's up, fam? I don't know. I don't know what that is. Um, I'm coming to you today from Disney World, Florida. That's right. Find me a professor who cares about his students enough to take time out of his vacation to talk to them. Um, you don't have to look far. That's right. I, I'm right here. I I care about you that much. Um, so yeah, sorry, it's a little late. Yesterday, I turned 50 yesterday, so that was a long day, and I was like, I gotta shoot a video tonight, and I'm like, no, I don't, because I'm the teacher. So figured once we get to Florida, I'll kick my wife out and carve out some time for you guys to talk about Hassan Minhaj. Yeah. Um, so Hassan Minhaj is, I mean, you guys saw who he is. um, he's had this, like, he's had, he's got such a great comedic pedigree, right? He talks in the special about, his big break being um, not just the Pizza Hut commercial, but the Daily Show, right? He's one of these, I mean, seemingly hundreds of people who went through that sort of Daily Show training camp and went on to be um, kind of a player in the political humor sphere, right? Um, I mean, you could count like Steve Carell and Ed Helms, but they kind of went on to even bigger, more mainstream fame. But Minaj, Jordan Klepper, Larry Wilmore, Samantha Bee, Stephen Colbert, um, Mo Rocca, um, obviously Jon Stewart, but um, there's there's so many more that I'm forgetting. Lewis Black did a bunch of stuff um, for them. So his whole journey, right? We've talked about these comedians' journeys and the jester, poet, philosopher thing. Um, he kind of has a little unique spin on that. Um, this special's from 2017, so he was basically Daily Show. Then he did this special, and then it kind of overlapped with Patriot Act, which is like I I look at it as this sort of hybrid between the Daily Show and Last Week Tonight. That's the guy, John Oliver. That's another one of the Daily Show grads. Patriot Act, and some of you mentioned it in your comments that you watch it. Really good. That they really perfected the let's let's make news funny, um, but not funny like haha this happened, but more like how ridiculous the news has become. It's like I made that point, maybe not in this class, but I will now. But I do it a lot. But if if humor exists where shit's most fucked up, it would make sense that there would be a rash of political humorists at this current state in our civilization because politics is so fucked up, right? So the that statement and the current, I actually wrote about this in my one of my PhD exams, but basically saying that humor will be the new news eventually. And you could argue that there was a window of time when I was correct, like when the Daily Show and Colbert Report were on back to back at their peak. Like there's all these studies that people trusted the Daily Show, and more than Fox News and all those kinds of things, or MSNBC, mainstream news. So Patriot Act was like this further evolution of that, right? That's sort of younger, even this his stand up, this homecoming. Um, what's it called? Homecoming King. Is that what it's called? Um, there, it's younger, right? It's more his energy is he has youthful energy, right? So he's sort of aiming at. I mean, he's aiming at everybody, but it's sort of an update. He's to me he's a cross between like um, Bo Burnham. He's not quite as reliant on the sort of theatrics, right? And he's got the big screen in the back and like it's all over the stage and lighting cues and all that kind of stuff. Um, he's not quite Bo Burnham in that way. That's why I think he's a dialed back version. So he's a cross between maybe like Russell Peters, who we haven't watched, but you should watch him. Russell Peters and Bo Burnham or something. So it's like he definitely appeals. He's more appealing, I think, to kids your age, um, at least sort of right off the bat. But Patriot Act sort of hits that same chord, strikes that same chord where it's not quite. It's a younger, hipper version of Last Week Tonight, and again, really valuable show to watch. So you can tell right off the bat he's invested in more than just jokes, right? Um, he cares about a lot of things, and he brings up this idea that I don't think I've talked about it with you guys yet, but it's something it's been coming up in recent semesters, maybe the last like year and and it's this and I think media in general, TV, movies, stand up, the whole thing is sort of reacting, or at least acknowledging this idea that it it's it's ex it's exploitation versus exploration. Like you can watch a TV show and feel like it's exploiting something or it's exploring something. It's kind of a fine line between. Like for years and years and years, most like TV sitcoms, let's say, right, exploited difference, right? They made fun of gay characters or um, characters of color or whatever it is. They made fun of them for their stereotypes. They had them on the show to build in these sort of like token jokes, basically. The big one is like Raj from Big Bang Theory. Like he's simply on the show so that they can do Indian jokes, right? I mean we know barely anything about him. It's not really an exploration of him as a character in any way, or him as a representative of that culture. And it's like it's kind of a bummer when you see that, right? But that's just how it was for a long time. But now there's more and more media that is exploring those things. And the show that comes to mind, if we're using this Big Bang Theory Raj thing, Master of None, which is Aziz Ansari's show on Netflix, which really explores, what it means to be an Indian immigrant and living in America. It explores both cultures. It explores the trials and tribulations. It explores the racism. It explores it. You learn about what it means to be that instead of just like saying, "Oh, he's different. Isn't that funny?" So this is an experiment in exploration versus exploitation, right? He's really exploring what it means to be brown in America, right? um, and the immigrant experience. Like a lot of you sort of obviously picked up on that. It wasn't hard to pick up. But that idea, once you start thinking about it, you will you'll find yourself being like, oh, this is not good. This is exploiting otherness, whatever it might be. But when it's exploring, it's it's infinitely more entertaining, I think. Um, the Rami Youssef, who you should have watched or should be preparing to watch for this course, he has a show. It's called Rami, and it's about being Muslim in America. And it's I learned so much about just the Muslim faith and just like really like interesting things about it. Things that someone like me, a fat white guy from the suburbs, would never know. Like he really explores it. That doesn't mean that they take it too seriously, right? Hassan Minhaj Peppers is obviously it's a stand-up show. It's all jokes, right? But in there, like some of you noted, is this story about an immigrant and an immigrant experience, and he makes it valuable. He's like, I'm not just gonna be up here to do an Indian voice and make jokes about Indian stereotypes. Like that would be too easy, and it would be an exploitation of my entire identity. So he's really engaging in exploration of not just himself, but his community and his faith and his like all those good things. So that's a biggie, and I'm glad I didn't leave my notes at home. um, he a couple of you mentioned like being able to relate. So this is my point about I said this early in the semester. Like comedy is an attempt to relate. So if you're saying I can't relate to it, then you're not. You're the problem. So like this is a perfect example. I have no idea what it's like to be an immigrant. None. But after watching this special, I do a little bit now. I'd never say like, oh, I know what it's like. I would never say that, but I understand more, right? Like I that's the point. I can relate to it. I can relate to it. Not that I've gone through the same thing. None of us have gone through the same thing as someone else. But I can relate more. I can sympathize more. I can sort of feel his pain or his triumph, whatever it is. So that keep that in mind going forward too. Every comedian is attempting to relate. Saying I can't relate to it is not a reason to write it off or stop watching or whatever, right? So that's a biggie. And speaking of like this exploration thing, a perfect sort of foil to this Hassan Minhaj approach of exploration is someone like George Lopez. I don't know if you guys know or care who he is, but he's a pretty big Mexican American comedian. And he uses most of his jokes to exclude, basically, anyone who's not Mexican. So that's what I've written down here. He's not like many comedians who use their platform or their performances to exclude. George Lopez does all these. I mean, most of his act is, it's yes, it's full of Mexican pride, but it's kind of veiled in this like, it's all based on these embracing the stereotypes kind of thing, which is sort of like if you're not Mexican and you're in that audience, and he's just being like, "Yeah, Mexicans rule, everyone else sucks." Like it just, yeah, that I guess it's funny, but it's using the comedy. It's not. He doesn't want to relate to me as a white dude. He just wants to sort of rally his people, if that makes any sense. But I mean, you can see in that horrible description of George Lopez that I just gave you the difference between what Hassan Minhaj is doing and what someone like George Lopez um, does or other comedians do. Um, I mentioned the connection to Bo Burnham relying on the technology and the production levels and just everything that was going on stage, other than just him, telling you these stories and talking. Um, it's another like laugh at my pain thing, right? I talked about that with Pryor. Oh, it was really gassy. Pryor and Kevin Hart, right? If Pryor didn't call his special Laugh at My Pain, Kevin Hart should not be able to ever call a special Laugh at My Pain. This is, this came out 2017 when confessional comedy kind of started to really become a movement, I guess. And in within confessional comedy, there is this inherent laugh at my pain sentiment, right? And like this came out. Patton Oswalt did a whole set about the death of his wife. Tig Notaro did the set at the Largo the day she found out she got cancer and literally did a set about it, like told everybody in the audience. Gerard Carmichael did a set where he came out of the closet and talked about, like, literally came out at the special. Gary Gulman has done a set about his depression and how to deal with it, things like that, how he's had to deal with it. And then, of course, Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, which kind of launched the whole movement, right? And here's this fits right in, right? It's way more honest than a lot of the stuff we've watched before. It feels that way, at least. More honest, more self-exploratory, more like, I don't know, I feel like there's more at stake. And we've talked about the stakes of comedy all semester, session, whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, confessional comedy is a thing. So I want to continue just talking about the whole his relationship with his dad, which is just so interesting, right? That first generation, second generation immigrant relationship, right? A kid who grows up in America with a parent or parents that didn't, because there's so much distance between them, right? It seems, with the whole the price we pay for just being here, being able to be here, for people letting us come here, the price we pay. We have to endure a little racism, right? Like, and how ridiculous that sounds to Hassan. What will people think, right? Like the whole what will people think, the generational gap in understanding of culture, because that's what I keep forgetting her name. The girlfriend, not really girlfriend, her mom, right? And dad, like, what will people think? Like, it doesn't, how would that look? Like that kind of preoccupation with what others think. hopefully it hasn't, but hopefully has been shed away generationally, but it hasn't because social media has arguably made it worse, exacerbated the what will people think mentality. Um, but I've told my kids every day of their lives, like, good morning, don't give a shit about what people think. Like, be you. Don't be anything else. Um, I doubt they listen. That's one of those things you learn when you get older, but you can try. Um, I also want to talk a little bit about representation. Um, Shruti brought up the idea like it's good to see like you know an Asian comedian, um, and agreed. Um, this representation, I think, for someone like me, like I understand because I study and talk about this stuff for a living, but your average, I think, white person takes it for granted, like what that means, you know, um, because all we've seen our whole lives on TV and in movies and on stage and in commercials, like literally is white, 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 white. So it's like, oh yeah, that's the norm. It's sort of reinforced. So again, trying to relate to that. So when you hear someone talk about representation, it's easy. The media a lot of times, or government or whatever, like likes to sort of dismiss that as like irrelevant or not significant. But Hassan talks about it in this. This was one of the most fascinating things for me when I was watching it. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be white, right? Which is funny, but he was dead serious. Like every white person he'd ever seen was, I mean, for the most part, successful and rich or a superhero or whatever it was, Batman, whatever. Um, so that that really hit me. Like that's what representation means. Is like to see yourself, see someone, That's why this he can't remember who compared him to Margaret Cho. I think Ryan did. Um, I remember Ryan mentioning it. Not just the Asianness, but that the um, how much of myself do I have to give up, right? Um, that idea, like we talked about that with Margaret Cho, definitely, um, and then going back even to like Cosby and Murphy, like that thing, like for the African American community, like that's got to be, it has to erode your identity a lot when you feel like you can't be your true self in any situation. You have to sort of adapt and pull back and in different situations and reveal part of yourself, hide part of yourself. Like that's got to be. It has to take a toll on anybody, and people of color, um, LGBTQ um, people have to do that every single day of their lives. Um, so back to representation, right? The whole uh, Margaret Cho with the TV show, right? Like, you know, she she became she was the first Asian lead actress in a TV show, and even got backlash from her own community, like you're doing it wrong, and the whole Asian consultant, and all that kind of stuff. Like we've complicated race so much and kind of deprived the culture of experiencing these different cultures in any real kind of way, in any exploratory kind of way. Certainly, we've exploited them, um, but that's kind of what Hassan's talking about here, right? wanting to be white, like seeing yourself in a movie or on a TV show or whatever it is, like how much that means. It can shape entire generations of people differently. That's one of the things he's really looking to sort of reinforce, or at least, you know, um, uh, what's the thing? Unpack um, with this special. It was like how where he fit in that whole thing, right? He went from wanting to be white, right, to you know being Hassan Minhaj. So like that's quite a transformation in and of itself. Um, Shruti was also talking about just, and you could document this, like um, there's been more Asian voices, right, um, in comedy, or just different voices, women included, um, gay people like on stage performing, making a living at it than in the last 100 years of comedy, right? Minaj, Aziz, Ronnie Chang, Joe Coy, Jimmy Wang, um, Ali Wong, uh, Russell Peters. Like you can go pretty deep if you want to. So that's the whole. There's a difference between I guess it's not tokenism, right? Because I think again, it, exploitation is tokenism basically. Um, so if you're in the exploration game, generally you're not playing the token thing. I don't know what that means. Anyway, um, one last thing that he talks about. I can't remember the part. I'm just looking at my notes right now. Talks about the what I wrote down as the paradox of bigotry, which is I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I have two examples to sort of um, hopefully help you. One is Patton Oswalt. Patton Oswalt does a bit about listening to people's heart, not their words, or basically focusing on intent rather than execution, maybe. Um, or as I say, you can say all the right things and mean none of them. Um, he paints this picture of like, be careful because it goes back to Carlin talking about how we've used language and created words to kind of dilute the impact of a lot of our nation's sins or whatever. He kind of goes into that where it's like, so there's two guys, right? One guy is like super like preppy, buttoned up, Ivy League educated, drives a Mercedes, owns a big house, whatever. That's the one guy. The other guy's toothless, redneck, sunburned, mullet, the whole thing. Those are the two guys. And then he gives them each dialogue. And the one guy basically runs through all this anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric, but it sounds great. A lot of big words, a lot of, lot of uh, the proper terms for things, the understood nomenclature, whatever. Um, but it's all negative. And then the redneck's like, I don't. Two gay people want to have butt sex, and more power to them. Like, what's it to me? I don't care. And he's like, it can be deceiving. There's a paradox of bigotry there, where it's like the bigot in this situation is the guy who doesn't look like the bigot, right? So it's you can look the part I guess my way is the best way of saying that. Anyway, um, um, you can say all the right things and mean none of them. And then the other example is the Donald Glover example, uh, which is this is the story that I remember. I think he was telling, maybe he was being interviewed or something. It was after he had just been announced as the new voice of Spider-Man. This was before all the Spider-Verse bullshit. Um, I can't remember the context of it, but he they were asking him like, "How does it feel?" He's like, "Oh, it's awesome, blah blah blah." And they're like, "What about the backlash?" I'm like, "Well, what backlash, you ask?" Well, of course, the internet lost its shit when they found out a black guy was going to be Spider-Man. And he's like, just reading through the comments, it's like hundreds and hundreds of these comments, and there's some good ones, but most of them were just like dropping n bombs and like just like really ignorant, just sort of like bullshit. And this is him. This is Donald Glover talking. He's like, yeah, those I don't. That doesn't bother me. People using the N word online and that kind of stuff. It's like that's just ignorance. They either don't know or they're just trying to be cool or get like there's nothing that doesn't bug me. I can easily get past that. I don't think twice about it. That's the kind of person that you know it's whatever. He's like, but there was one comment that really I think about it all the time, and it was like it's from a middle-aged guy, white guy, and he was making the he said basically there shouldn't be a black Spider-Man, not because he's black, but because it's impossible for a black teenager to be from Queens to be really into science and live with his aunt, like, or aunt and uncle or whatever. Like that was the problem. That's why, because inherently that could never be a thing, right? So this guy, this is Donald Glover talking. He's like, that's how systemic racism works, right? He doesn't even care about. There's no N bomb in there, right? There's nothing really like evil about what he says or cruel or hateful. It's just he just believes like straight up, like, oh, black people can't like science. Like it's inherent, it's natural. Like it's just ridiculous. Um, but that's the guy. That's the guy you got to watch out for. That's the guy who is sort of emblematic of this kind of. So I guess that's another paradox of bigotry, right? The stuff that's screaming in your face, and it's just like it's just noise, like that stuff, right? The N bombs and the whatever, like that's noise. But this really cuts, and you know that's that's something that I hadn't really hadn't really thought about. Both of those examples, and then I think the one of the big takeaways of Hassan Minhaj's special is that sort of push and pull um, between him and his dad and what was her name? Brittany Reed, something Reed, whatever. Her and her mom, and this the whole cultural thing, the generational thing, um, was just it reminded me of that kind of stuff. So, all right, this video is all chopped up because it kept cutting off. I apologize for that. Hopefully you got through it. Winding down. Get me your papers by Sunday, and keep commenting. You can comment right up until Friday, so keep doing that, and I'll talk to you guys soon.